Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by Eddie Hamilton. On today's episode, we will talk about his work on Top Gun Maverick and also cover his work on Mission Impossible, especially Dead Reckoning Part 1. It is my pleasure to welcome Eddie Hamilton.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me on. Great to talk to you.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that.
You got it. No problem.
Great. Eddie, at first I would like to talk about the beginnings of your career. What inspired you to become a part of this great industry? Maybe you could name a film which you liked especially, or any scene which stood out for you in terms of emotion, in terms of editing, anything that comes to mind.
Well, I was a child of the 70s and 80s, and my life changed like a lot of kids when I saw Star Wars. It was the most incredible experience that I'd ever had watching anything with my own eyes, and I only saw it on TV because I didn't get to go to the movies much as a kid. But I became obsessed with movies after that. And I remember having great experiences throughout the 80s, watching Indiana Jones and E.T. And things like Back to the Future, the original Top Gun, obviously, Die Hard, RoboCop, Aliens, all those kinds of classic 80s action movies. I remember absolutely loving. Lethal Weapon was another one. I remember seeing a movie called JFK in 1991, which I thought was absolutely spellbinding in terms of editing and in terms of sound and using mixed formats of film stock. If anyone hasn't seen JFK, my word, it's a masterpiece. It won the Oscar for editing in 92. And also, I remember when I first saw Bonnie and Clyde with Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, the editing in that movie really stuck with me as well. So those are some of the influences that I remember loving in the cinema, and on TV when I was younger. But that I remember just loving the escapism of it and loving the adventure and loving the fact that you were sitting in a cinema and then the film would start and you would be transported to a totally different world. I remember being so entertained by it and so thrilled by it. And thinking maybe one day I could be a part of that world in terms of making movies which audiences around the world could enjoy. And so I kind of set my sights on that as a career goal from a very young age. I mean, literally from the age of 8, I was just obsessed with films, thought I'd be a writer director, but when I was 17, I played around with editing for the first time, and it suited my temperament. I'm a bit of a nerd, so I like technology and I love stories. So the combination of storytelling and technology really worked for me. And the editor has the best job on the film crew, I think.
Great, Eddie. Thank you very much. And in terms of Top Gun, I must say I thoroughly enjoyed Top Gun Maverick. I think it's one hell of a summer blockbuster. And at first I was like, Top Gun 2, what's that gonna be like? Because I really enjoyed the first one. And then Top Gun Maverick came along and I think it made $1.8 billion at the box office so far, which I think is absolutely huge. And I think nostalgia also played a big role because so many people love the 80s Top Gun and they grew up watching the film. So that certainly helped.
Yeah.
But I think, Eddie, in terms of story, I think Top Gun Maverick is it is the more mature film. I think Top Gun 1 is very cool. It's a great 80s flick. It's a product of its time. But I think Top Gun Maverick is even a better film than the first one. What are your thoughts on that?
That's very kind of you to say. Well, everyone on the crew, hundreds of people working on that film, felt the pressure and the weight of expectation from the worldwide audience. Nobody thinks making a sequel to Top Gun is a good idea. You won't find a single person on the planet, maybe Tom Cruise and Jerry Bruckheimer, but everyone else, we were like, wow, if we can pull this off, it's going to be very challenging to have anybody not feel very cynical about this. And I love the first one. I remember seeing it 6 times in 1986 when it came out in the cinema. And so we all worked for 2 years with the weight of expectation of the audience, of millions of people around the world who would be sat there with their arms firmly crossed going, well, I've bought a ticket to this and I don't think it's going to be any good, but I'm here because I love the original Top Gun. And we really wanted to reassure the audience within 2 minutes that we cared about the original film and we cared about how they felt about it. And we wanted to welcome the audience back into the world of Top Gun with a very similar opening. More modern technology in terms of the F-18s, the F-35s, and the cameras we were using and the sound mix. But we used the same font and we used the same Top Gun anthem. We used Danger Zone. Although the sequence is a lot tighter and more propulsive than the first movie, it's very similar. And so you instantly feel that the filmmakers care about your experience in the movie, which we really did passionately. We worked on the film very, 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 very hard to make sure that it delivered. And it wasn't easy, I will say, to find the right tone and the right balance for Maverick and Rooster and Penny and Hangman and Phoenix and Bob, and to find the right balance so that you are introduced to the characters correctly and they're each given the right amount of screen time and they're each you care about them enough so that when they go on the final mission, you're rooting for them. We're also teaching you about the mission as you go through the film, so you're learning all the rules of the rules of engagement. So when the third act starts, you're just on the ride with the characters, and you understand about Miracle Number 1 and Miracle Number 2 and the Sams. But we had to reintroduce the character of Maverick and find out where he was using that Dark Star sequence. I love the music that we found for that scene. I love the music throughout, actually. But it was, I think the overwhelming success of it surprised us all. And I think that partly it's because we were coming out of lockdown, and Top Gun Maverick was one of the first big movies to be open in cinemas where people kind of felt safe to go back to the movies. But the reaction was so positive and wonderful. We weren't able to test the movie. That was the thing. We did a couple of test screenings before COVID hit, but the movie was nowhere near finished, and we didn't have the right music and the right sound design, and we still were refining, Maverick's relationship with Penny and Maverick's relationship with Rooster, and how much screen time to spend in the air and how to intercut all the flight sequences with what was going on in the classroom on the ground. When you watch the movie, it feels quite effortless to watch because we worked on it so hard. We go through every scene dozens and dozens of times for every movie we make. Sometimes 20 or 30 times a day, we will go through the same scene, looking at every nuance and every emotional beat and making sure that everything is smooth and we're holding the audience's hand on the journey, so it's totally seamless from beginning to end, but making sure that you care about the characters, making sure you understand the geography of the aerial sequences, and making sure that the sound and the music is awesome. But nothing is easy, and almost in editing, like the art of editing is compressing the maximum amount of story and the minimum amount of screen time, while still making sure that you're actively involved emotionally throughout the film, and you don't bump off the ride at all. You have to be leaning in, and that's the real trick. And it takes a very long time to get that right. Whenever something starts out, it's bumpy and uneven and doesn't have any focus, and any creative process requires a lot of revisions to get something really, really great. And myself, Joe Kosinski, Jerry Bruckheimer, Tom Cruise, Chris McQuarrie, we all care so much about the end result. And we did not compromise on anything. You know, I went through every frame of footage, 840 hours of footage, to make sure that the very, very, very best shots that we got in all our aerial photography found their way into the movie. So I can guarantee you that everything that you're seeing is the most awesome version of that scene. And it was very time consuming, but in the end, as you say, you weren't disappointed and the audience wasn't disappointed. And we were thinking about you, you know, the audience all the way through. And when we finished the movie in lockdown, all done remotely, working from home, we were unable to test the film. So we had to rely almost entirely on gut instinct about whether this was right or not. And Tom's instincts as a producer are so accurate to what the audience needs and what he wants the audience to feel. And he was involved in every decision. You know, he has final cut on the movie. Even though Joe Kosinski was the director, Tom Cruise has final cut as the producer. And, you know, he worked on the music, he worked on the sound mix, he worked on the color, he worked on, you know, approving every aspect of the finished film. And I'm thrilled that it did so well. I really am. But it was the hardest thing I've ever done by many orders of magnitude. It was a very, very intense 2 years. So, but I'm so happy that we managed to give so many people a great time at the movies and didn't disappoint them.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that, Eddie. And I think Top Gun was very tough. And I also believe that Chris Lebanzon and Billy Weber, the editors of the original Top Gun, also had a very, very hard time, you know, navigating through the footage and to create the film based on the footage. So also,
yes,
I spoke to both Billy and also Chris on Top Gun, and they both stated how difficult it was and challenging it was to really find the essence of that film and to create and to create the film in the editing room based on what Tony Scott had shot.
Yeah.
And would you say from a filmmaking perspective and also editorially that editing aerial sequences is way more difficult than a regular action film, quote unquote regular?
Yes, probably, because you can't really control the footage that you're going to get when an F-18 is going 700 miles an hour in the sky. The cameras kind of grab what they can get. So you're constantly looking at the footage that you have got and breaking it down to the most awesome sections and thinking, how can I cut this together so it makes sense and still tells a coherent story? Some of it you can plan, but the sequences that they planned on the ground were very much longer and more elaborate. And the tricky thing was they filmed all the interior shots of the pilots first, and then months later they did all the exterior shots. So I was working with all these interior shots for ages. And then sometimes we would even go with our phones and film model jets on wooden sticks just to give a sense of like what the jets might be doing in the air. And then we got all this exterior footage. And then once you start putting the sequence together, you realize that you don't have enough to tell this story, but you've got more than enough to tell this story. Maybe we should lean more on that story. And often I would stack up lots of options for each moment. So if I had several shots of a jet turning right, I would stack them up and I would say, I think this is the best. But if Joe Kosinski or Jerry Bruckheimer or Tom Cruise would walk into the editing room and go, what other shots have we got? I would say, well, there's this, there's this, there's this, there's this. So they could tell that I had been very thorough. It's a lot easier to do that with a digital non-linear editor than it is with cutting on 35mm film print, which is very time consuming. So I have enormous respect for what Chris and Billy did. Chris Lebanzon came on to help for a few months on the new Top Gun as well. And he did some incredible work and was very, very helpful to refine certain sections of the movie that we were kind of struggling with. And Stephen Mirioni came on to help for several months as well, another brilliantly talented editor. So I can't take all the credit. But it was amazing talking to Chris Levinson and hearing the stories about working with Tony Scott over the years, because he did many Tony Scott films with him, all of which are, wonderful pieces of cinema.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you. And I can imagine editing a film of this magnitude, be it Top Gun, be it one of the Kingsman movies that you worked on, or Resident Evil Apocalypse.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Or even, Mission Impossible. You've done 3 mission movies. And can you imagine editing these gigantic films on tools which existed 40 years ago?
Yeah. I don't quite know how. Listen, if you watch some of these very ambitious movies, you can watch Gone with the Wind, or you can watch Bridge on the River Kwai, or you can watch, I remember, Apocalypse Now. Good heavens, try, 4 editors working on that movie for however many years they worked on that. Also, another movie I remember having an enormous amount of footage was the Warren Beatty film Reds. But you watch those movies and they're immaculately crafted, and the schedules weren't that much longer than our schedules today. And I think the editors you adapt to the tools that you have. And when I started out, I did a lot of tape to tape editing, where you have to commit to the edits as you're going along. It's not so easy to refine them later. And I got used to it, and with film, obviously you could kind of literally remove physical frames from the work print. But making trims is time consuming, and on an Avid Media Composer timeline, I can just press a button and look at the changes immediately. But, I think humans adapt to the way that they work. And I'm sure that if I was born 40 years earlier, I may have found my way into the film industry and adapted to use the film tools and worked. And I think you have to do a lot more thinking about the storytelling up front and less kind of experimentation. And a lot of what I do, and a lot of what all editors do now with digital timelines, is we sketch out scenes, and I don't worry too much about if it's any good or not. I just start sketching out ideas and work my way through to the end of the scene, and then worry about making it good. It's never going to be good at the start. Film editing is a process, and it takes a lot of time and iterations to dial in a scene and focus on the emotional nuances of the scene and get it playing perfectly and smoothly and emotionally for the audience. Really, I mean, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and months and months and months of work. I can't, I worked on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 for nearly 3 years. 3 years for a 2.5-hour movie. And so you imagine how many times we went through that film in 3 years. I certainly think that it would have been a lot harder. And look, I'm sitting here at home, and I'm sitting in my house, in the loft in my house, and I can edit a movie right here, but I couldn't do that if I was doing it on film. And also on these movies, I've edited everywhere. Like, I've edited in Norway, I've edited in South Africa, I've done it on an aircraft carrier, on a plane. In Florida, we worked for a bit, in New York, in Maine. I travel around with my laptop and my hard drive, and I work wherever the director wants me to go. Sometimes I go to Tom Cruise's house and work there. I plug in the hard drive and I work there. And you just couldn't do that 40 years ago. So, and also if you're trying to work remotely, of course, that was impossible. Nowadays, we've got all these digital tools to stream video over the internet at very high quality with low latency. So, we would figure out a way to get it done, but it would be, much harder probably.
Yeah, probably. And thank you, Eddie. And as I mentioned before, Dead Reckoning Part 1 is the 3rd Mission Impossible film that you worked on. The first one was Rogue Nation, then Fallout.
Yes.
Fallout, followed by Dead Reckoning Part 1. And has it gotten any easier over the years, or do you think that this was your toughest mission so far?
It was very tough. However, what has got easier is my understanding of the process that Chris McQuarrie and Tom Cruise embark on when they make these films. Chris McQuarrie is evolving the story and the script and the characters every day as we film. And when you're rolling cameras for 2 years, there's a lot of changes and a lot of fluidity that comes with the scenes and with how the characters evolve. And if you're not used to that, it's very daunting and quite confusing, because if you have a script and you're used to understanding, where the characters are coming from and where they're going to in the script, it really helps you as an editor. But if you don't understand that, you're pretty much at sea, wondering where to steer each scene and what to focus on. But now I don't worry about it. Now I sketch some scenes out, and I still have stuff to show Chris McQuarrie when he comes in, but he's quite often got a very different idea of the purpose of the scene by the time he gets to editing with me. And we dive in and we refine the edits, and we go through every single line of dialogue from every camera angle to check that it is the very best emotional content and nuance. And this one was, I mean, there are no easy sequences in this movie, I will say, from the submarine, the desert, the airport, the DNI, the Rome, Venice, the train, all of them are monstrously complicated, with a lot of intercutting and multiple characters and many eye lines and, different storylines. And every sequence was a big challenge, and I'm up for it. And we had the time to do it. But and I don't worry too much, because I know that we'll figure it out. The film started quite long, started around 4 hours. The early edits of the movie were 4 hours, and we got it down to 2 hours, 36 minutes without credits now. And that was a lot of work to cut, an hour and 24 minutes out of our first assembly, and yet have it still be the same film, essentially. All the same essential emotional beats are in there. It's just a lot of stuff that we thought was essential turned out not to be in the fullness of time. And as we slowly work through the process of editing, we're constantly compressing the film. And that I think was the hardest thing, was getting this film down to a very, very tight running time. But certainly from the feedback from audiences has been very complimentary about how short the film feels compared to how long it actually is, which is really the holy grail of editing, is when you get into a movie and you watch it and the time flies by. That's really the state of the art. If you can get to that point, then you've really succeeded as a film editor. So I'm very pleased with how it turned out. But I mean, this year, from January, I had 5 days off until, July, when we finished the movie. There were a lot of 7-day weeks, a lot of very late nights, and I was very tired. I mean, properly exhausted, deeply, deeply exhausted to my bones, because we were working so hard over so many days to get so much done. Partly that's because we were doing 2 films at once, so we were filming bits of the next movie. Partly, we were very fortunate with Top Gun that we were nominated for some awards, and we had BAFTAs and the Oscars in March. We had pickups to do. We filmed on an aircraft carrier. We filmed in the Arctic, all in March. So, there were some crazy weeks where we were just going from one place to another, to another, to another, to another. And I was carrying around my 160 terabyte hard drive and my laptop and plugging it in and working where I could. And you're in all kinds of different time zones. But I'm not complaining. I love it. But it was very intense indeed. When you're operating on not enough sleep and you are under the pressure to deliver, a truly world-class piece of film entertainment, which hopefully people will be watching for decades to come. That's quite a lot of pressure. So in some ways it was easier than the others, because I'm in the groove now. And in some ways it was harder, because this film is a much more complicated film in terms of editing than the other two.
And I also must say that the film is really long. It's 165 minutes, including the credits.
Yeah.
But it certainly doesn't feel that way. So I must agree here. I really have to agree. And the film features many complex scenes. But it's not just an average action movie. It also has a very good plot. And you really need to pay attention in order to follow the story. And then you have these gigantic action sequences, the chase through Rome, for instance,
Yeah.
the train sequence, the Ilsa fight sequence
Yeah.
also comes to mind. I cannot stress enough how well crafted this film is. It's, I think, one of the best Mission Impossible films so far. I still feel that the original Mission Impossible by Brian De Palma is my favorite mission, but especially episodes, or part 5, 6, and now 7 really, really up the ante. All I can say is congratulations on these massive movies. In terms of working with Christopher McQuarrie and also Tom Cruise, I understand these two gentlemen are very hands-on and specific as to how a film should look and as to how the story should be told. So how much, if I may ask, leeway do you have along the way? Or do you feel that sometimes a certain amount of micromanagement can even be helpful?
That's a great question. Thank you for everything you said about the film. I really appreciate it. I love the original 1996 Mission Impossible as well. And to think that it's evolved into this with Chris McQuarrie over the last 3 movies, and obviously into part 2, is it's certainly taken the series in a very interesting direction, because there is a lot of connective tissue between the films, should the fans want to follow that. Obviously, this movie works as totally on its own. You don't have to have seen any of the other ones. And we remythologize the IMF. We talk about, we define what it is, and we explain. We've come up with this new idea, which is when you're asked to join, you're offered the choice, and you have to choose to accept all that great mythology which McHugh introduced. So this creative process is very challenging, because there is no script, and so we are constantly discovering the movie. Chris McQuarrie is basically collecting ingredients when he's in production and rolling cameras, and then when we get into the edit is where we actually create the film. We bake all the ingredients, or we cook the ingredients and make the film, and everything changes constantly. The film constantly evolves. The ideas and the emotional arcs in the movie will change quite a bit. And sometimes when Chris and I sit down to edit a scene, we think it's going to be one thing, and then a few hours later, when we've been working on it, we discover something completely different, or we discover that the first half of the scene needs to be cut out completely, and we're just going to work on the second half of the scene. And so it's a process of discovery, and I certainly am free to contribute as much or as little as I want. And I'm doing all the work of cutting the movie. Chris is sitting with me, and he is like a co-editor on the film, because he works very, very closely with me when we're in post-production and we're editing. We're shoulder to shoulder, and we're confronting every moment of the movie and exploring all the footage and coming up with ways of making the scenes feel effortless to watch. And McHugh is directing. He's directing the composition and the cinematography on the set. He's really creating these very strong, dynamic compositions and angles. He's picking the lenses very carefully. You'll notice in this movie there are very few wide shots in dialogue scenes, because he likes close-ups, because they're emotional. You're intimate with the character. He likes a lot of common geography. So he will show you a profile of the widow, and you'll see Ilsa in the background, and you'll see a profile of Gabriel. You'll see Ilsa in the background. So you get geography from the scene, but he's using a tight close-up in the foreground to keep the frames emotional. And so when we're editing, we're constantly juggling between all those different pieces of common geography. The sequences take a long time to film, because we need enough variety to give us enough different angles in the editing room so that we can keep the pace up. And it depends how we want characters to interrelate on the screen, and when we want them to appear on frame together and when we want them to appear on their own. I quite like working with a director who sits in the edit and works on it with you, because then you don't go down too many blind alleys just trying stuff out without the director there to go, that feels right or that doesn't feel right. I'm happy to do whatever Chris wants. So sometimes he'll leave me alone and say, try something out, and I'll show him something. And sometimes he'll go, no, let's go through this together. And I love it, basically, because you make progress very quickly and the movie improves dramatically. And he is extraordinarily talented as a storyteller, as a visual storyteller as well, not just a writer. He really is like in the top 5 in the world of somebody who understands the power of lenses, understands the power of light and locations, how to create emotion with all the tools that he has on set, how to direct actors, and then how to edit and how to direct the sound mix and how to work with music. I mean, he really is absolutely astonishingly good at that, which is why the movies turn out as well as they do. And a lot of the crew, no, we all have faith in Chris and Tom to figure stuff out. And quite often on the set, the crew won't really understand what it is they're filming because they don't have a script. But we all trust them and we know that it'll make sense. And so over the last few weeks, as the crew has been watching the finished movie, they understand how it all went together. And in Chris's mind, he was building all this and then discovering it with me in the editing room. And as you can see, the process works because it turns out a very interesting, tight, exciting, dynamic movie, which has, a 15-minute dialogue scenes in it where they're very exciting to watch because there's, the editing is pacey and the emotions are running high and the stakes are great. And it's all because of Chris McQuarrie's skill as a writer and a director, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. And I'm curious, you probably get footage on a daily basis, but many scenes of today's motion pictures, especially also action-oriented pictures, are not necessarily shot in camera, but they are CGI driven. Can you comment on the footage which you were sent and how much of the film was actually shot in camera?
Yeah, everything's shot in camera. It makes these movies feel different to other movies, tangibly different, because it's grounded in the real world and real physics. And we do some green screen, for example, if there's a tight close-up of someone driving a car, we may sometimes use a green screen. Very, very rarely. There is a lot of visual effects for rig removal, because when Tom Cruise and Esai Morales are fighting on the roof of a train, they're tied on with cables so that they can't fall off. And all that stuff has to be removed with visual effects. So there are a lot of VFX shots in the movie. There's a lot of camera rigs on the cars. If we're running multiple cameras, sometimes one camera will see another camera in shot and it needs to be painted out. So there is a lot of that goes on. But, they built these gigantic sets like the nightclub, with all the dancers and all the crowd. That was all built for real, and filmed for weeks and weeks. There is visual effects when where you see the adjutant walking through all the typewriters in the DNI. We only had about 100 people there with typewriters, but there were 100 people and 100 typewriters. It might have been more than that. It might have been 200 people, but the room feels like there's 1,000 people in there because of the genius of ILM. But a lot of it is, there's a lot that's shot practically for reference. I mean, obviously, the whole car chase in Rome and everything in Venice is all real, and all the train is real. Inside the train carriages, that was built on a soundstage with green screens, but they have incredibly elaborate lighting rigs to simulate the moving light of a train. They're all on gimbals so that the train carriages move. They're on bellows so that they can manipulate and make them feel like the train carriages are going along. So it gives a kind of natural rhythm to the characters inside. we're really working with the state of the art in terms of what we can capture with the cameras that exist today, and going to real locations and shooting stuff practically. And so I get footage every day. We filmed for, like I said, 2 years on this movie. There were some hiatuses, but generally speaking, we were rolling cameras the whole time. So there's a lot of footage coming in every day, sometimes 2 hours, 4 hours, sometimes 6 hours, not often 6 hours, but generally speaking about 4 hours a day. And I'm watching it all, and I'm breaking it all down and labeling it and marking what I think are the good bits and starting to sketch out the scenes. And I'm very, very meticulous about how I break footage down so that I can find everything later. Like in a year's time, when I'm going back to revisit the scene, I want to be able to load up my selects roll and know how I broke all the shots down, and so that I can show Chris McQuarrie everything that he's got and all the different camera angles. And there's a lot of, media management that comes with that. If you're dealing with, 100, I think I've got 130 terabytes of media for these two movies at the moment. Which is a lot. It's well over 1,000 hours of footage for two movies. We've shot about 40% of part two already. Well over 1,000 hours. I'm going to say maybe even 1,200, 1,300 hours of footage. So it's a lot. But when you're on a film for a long time, you can stay on top of it and make sure that each day you have gone through and have a mental picture of everything that they've shot, so you can answer questions and you can give feedback to Chris and Tom if they need it on everything that's been through.
Right, thank you. Did you actually have the chance to use Lorne Balfe's music to also edit some of the scenes, or did you have to use temp?
We don't use temp, we just work silent. So Lorne was writing a lot of suites, and we did have some of his music, but we never put it on early in the process. Quite often, McHugh and I will work completely silent through a scene. We may have dialogue. For an action scene, it's totally silent. And we feel the rhythms, and we feel the energy, and then the inherent intention of each frame of film and each shot cut next to each other, to make sure that it's working as a piece of silent visual storytelling first. Going back to Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, the way that they would work on their films silent, and Tom and McHugh are gigantic fans of Buster Keaton, and there are a lot of references to Buster Keaton movies in Dead Reckoning Part 1, in Fallout as well, and in Rogue. But Matt, there's a huge respect for silent filmmaking as an art form. And if you watch Top Gun Maverick, or if you watch Dead Reckoning Part 1 with the sound completely off, I'm sure you'll still get most of the story, because we are using the tools of visual storytelling in terms of composition and lens choice, editing, pacing, to give you an emotion, and of course the actors' performances, to tell you a visual story and make sure that you understand what's going on, because a lot of the audience doesn't speak English watching these movies. English might be a second or third, or they might not even speak it at all. So we have to make sure that the movie works visually. And only when we've got a scene kind of working quite well with no sound and no music do we explore putting music on it. And sometimes I will do it on the Media Composer timeline, and sometimes we will ask Cecile Tornasac, our very, very skilled music editor, to take some of the suites that Lorne has written and try them on the picture and just see the emotional effect that we create. He's written, I think, I'm not exaggerating when I say he's written about 14 hours of music for this film. What will happen is Lorne will be sent dailies online, and he will have them running in his studio, and he will just start writing music, not to picture. He'll just start writing music that feels like he feels when he watches all this raw footage. And he will give us all the stems. So he'll break down the strings and the percussion and the brass and the woodwinds and the synth and all that. We'll have all those piano. We'll have all that broken down into individual constituent parts, and then Cecile can take those suites and work with them to picture. And McHugh is very careful, because then what he'll do is he'll go through the scene with just music, with no dialogue, and he'll say, is the music telling the story? And he'll make sure that whatever the music's doing is emotionally accurate for the film. Every single note we will go through forensically, and every piece of every beat of percussion and every string swell and every horn and every piano note, we'll go through everything and very meticulously and make sure that it's as good as it can possibly be, and that it's emotionally truthful to what's going on in the film. So hopefully when you watch the movie, it all feels coherent and smooth and effortless to watch. We're serving it up to you, so it really becomes very entertaining, and you're not having to work hard to watch the film. At least I hope that's how the audience feels. So that's how we work with music. So like I said, we start completely silent, and we only bring music on quite late in the process. Occasionally I may put a piece of music on for fun when I'm editing, just to see how it feels, but I will never play it to Chris McQuarrie with music on. I'll just mute the track and we'll watch it silent and see how we feel.
Great. Thank you, Eddie. And I would like to get your thoughts on some of the do's and the don'ts of an editor.
The do's are: be thorough, don't cut corners, watch everything, break everything down meticulously, work hard, stay enthusiastic, keep smiling, say thank you to your team every day, because they are working incredibly hard to help you. Make sure that your team are treated well and that they can have a life outside of the film. That's very important to me. We all support each other. So if somebody needs to, take their kid to school or go to a school play or go to the doctor or the dentist, they can all do that. If the director wants to try something, try it immediately. Don't be defensive. Don't try and debate the change. Just let's try everything. There's no point in debating, really. If someone has an idea, let's try it, because even if it doesn't work, you probably will learn something about the movie and it may improve as a result of that. So I'm always happy to try any idea that everyone has. That's really, really important. Don't be too attached to anything that you've done when you're editing. Be prepared to throw it out and start again if it doesn't work. And I do that quite a bit. Like, stuff I do doesn't work because, the idea behind the scene has changed, or where it is in the film has changed. So you need to recut the scene from scratch sometimes. But be grateful that you're working. There are a lot of unemployed people. I never take it for granted when I go to work every day. I feel very fortunate that I get to collaborate with brilliant cinematographers and costume designers and production designers and hair and makeup designers, the sound designers, the composer. Everybody is world class, and I love it. The other things to do are exercise every day, drink a lot of water, eat healthily, get good sleep so that you're alert and that you can be the best version of yourself every day when you're at work. Say thank you to your partner every morning. Spoil them when it's your wedding anniversary, when it's Valentine's Day, when it's their birthday, when it's Christmas, and Mother's Day if you have children. Just spoil your partner rotten and be very grateful for their support. Anyone working in the film industry does have to work very long hours, and so your partner does end up sometimes doing a lot of the heavy lifting with the family and the home and taking the kids to school and things like that. And I leave the house usually at 6:30 in the morning, and I don't get back until 9 o'clock, usually 10 o'clock sometimes. So the days are very long. And like I said, this year I've done a lot of 7-day weeks, which are not healthy for work-life balance, but is what was necessary in this case to finish the movie on schedule and make it awesome. And I never want to compromise on the quality of the film, because it's your legacy and it's there forever for people to enjoy. And you don't want to feel like you could have done better. You want to make sure you've tried every single thing. but the most important thing really is enthusiasm and love for movies. I love it. My whole being. It's my church. It's my I have a spiritual relationship with movies, and I've had my happiest times of my life. You know, some of the happiest times of my life have been in cinemas watching films. I love it so much, and it's there's nothing like it when you're sitting, especially, you know, I even love really long movies. If you're in a movie and you can get totally lost in it with the audience, it's just, there's nothing like it. It's the best feeling. um you know, you can just be transported to anywhere, you know, that the human mind can imagine. You can find yourself there, and I love it so much. And so reminding yourself of the joy of what you're doing is so important every day, and not taking it for granted, you know, all of those things.
Thank you very much, Eddie. What is the longest day you ever had to pull off, schedule wise, if I may ask?
Well, on this movie, okay, so I think, you know, there's been a few days where we've gone past midnight. There was one day where we didn't finish till 4 a.m. and we started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and and I was editing literally, you know, all that time right through to 4 a.m. when we finished, because we were racing to make a screening deadline, and we just had a lot of work to do, and we had to dive in and do it. So I kind of almost did 2 days worth of work in one day then. I don't like doing it because it's very unhealthy, but it was necessary in that particular case, because we had a deadline to hit. And deadlines are frustrating, but they're also healthy, because stuff gets done when there's a deadline. You don't kind of drift around. You know, you're aiming for a specific point in time to make sure that everything's ready. And when the team has a deadline, they're aiming for that, and it's quite healthy in a way to set ambitious deadlines on a project to make sure that things get done and you don't slip behind. But yeah, that was probably the longest day. So I got into home around like 6 a.m. or something. It was really intense. I mean, very, very hard work.
In terms of editing and the whole process, did you encounter any challenges on Dead Reckoning which were new to you? And I know you're not a stranger to big productions and also to action movies. Does anything come to mind which was really challenging when compared to some of the previous pictures you edited?
That's a great question. That is a great question. I mean, the airport scene is very, very challenging because there's so much going on there and so many ways which you can put it together. And, you know, you're balancing so many characters and you're trying to make sure that it's a rocket ride. That was difficult. And the other thing that was actually very, very difficult to get right was the intercutting in Venice, when Ethan runs out of the nightclub and then he's chasing Grace through the alleyways in Venice. There was so much of that. And any time that you're intercutting stories, there's so many ways of putting it together. You know, you're intercutting between Ethan and Paris fighting in the narrow alley. You're intercutting with Grace fighting Gabriel. Then Ilsa's there. Then Ethan's running through the alleys. And to build to that climax was very difficult and took us a long time to find the balance. It wasn't right, you know, for a year. And we only got it working right near the end when we found the musical identity for that scene. Oh my word, that was difficult. The train scene, in terms of, you know, it started out like an hour and a half long and it's down to, you know, 50 something minutes now, maybe just under. And that so we had to cut a lot out but keep it all the same. We're away from Ethan for a long portion of the story there, and obviously Ethan's the protagonist and he usually drives the story forward, but on the train we switched points of views into Grace for a lot of that, sometimes to Paris and Gabriel. So it was very, very difficult to get that right. And I think the hardest challenge was making the film not feel like it was 2.5 hours long, because but we were very sensitive to the audience telling us, no, that's still too long. That's too long. You know, a lot of the car chase in Rome we cut down. A lot of the action in the train we cut right down to the absolute bone. I mean, we are down to the frame on all those sequences. We are down to the frame of how much we could trim out and still make it make sense. I think that was probably the biggest thing, was starting with such a long version of the movie where so much of it was great, and getting it down to this very compact running time. But also, what was also a challenge, because I've never done a part one and a part two before, and making the end of part one feel satisfying in itself rather than having a cliffhanger, so that the audience feels like they've had a really great meal and they come away very satisfied and excited to be the next film, but not kind of left in suspense, really. You have a sense of where the movie might be going in part two, but it definitely feels like a single film. There are some ideas that we're planting about the AI and all that stuff, and Ethan's backstory, which don't quite pay off. But the rest of it, there's a solid arc for Ethan. There's a solid arc for Grace. You understand, they're after this MacGuffin of this key, the two halves of this key, and by the end of the movie, they have the key and they know what the key unlocks, which was the whole impossible mission in this film. So, and it all ties into the submarine that you see at the beginning and the end. So it does feel like a unified whole movie, which was also quite a challenge. And when people started telling us that they felt satisfied at the end, but they wanted to see the next one, that was a very rewarding piece of feedback to get.
Yes. And I love the airport sequence, especially the part when they are trying to chase down Ethan Hunt's, Tom Cruise's character, and
Yes.
Simon Pegg, Benji, when he has to solve the riddle.
Yes. That was great. It was so difficult. Originally there were like 4 more riddles in the film. And so we had to keep cutting them down, and then when to cut to Benji, when to cut to Grace and Ethan, and when to cut to Luther, and when do you interrupt? That bit where Luther says, "Sorry to bother you, Ethan, but do you happen to know what's always approaching but never arrives?" And then Grace says, "Tomorrow," and all of that was just when someone describes the scene to you as an editor, you shudder because it's so difficult to get that stuff right. But the real trick is just to get stuck in and try stuff out and know that it's not going to be any good for ages, and just keep refining it until stuff slowly kind of clicks into place. And now when you watch it, you're just in the scene. But we had so much stuff that we had to cut out. Loads more of Benji in the luggage area. Great introductions to Gabriel and Paris, beautiful shots, massive shots that we had to cut out. But the process is telling the maximum amount of story and the minimum amount of screen time. And when you've got a long movie, if it can go, it must go. But yeah, that we were working on that scene for a year, editing it just to get it working really well. I'm not exaggerating, and some days we would go over the scene over and over again. We'd just sit. It was for a while, it was reel 2 of the movie. Then it was half of reel 2 and reel 3. And we break the film down into reels, which are about 20-minute chunks. So they're easier to manage in post-production for VFX and for sound and for music and for my computer, which if you try and load the whole movie, it struggles a bit because there's so much going on the timeline. But if you break it down into 20-minute chunks, it's kind of more manageable. And your team can work on other parts of the movie while you're working on that little bit, But we would just go over and over and over, and then stuff we would think was essential, we'd look at and we go, do we need that? And we would take it out and we'd run it and we'd go, actually it works fine, or maybe we need to put back those 2 lines of dialogue, but we can remove these 5 lines. So yeah, it was a big challenge. But McHugh and I have been working together since 2014 now, so we've got a very good working relationship and a very collaborative relationship, and there's a lot of mutual respect and understanding and trusting the process that, it's not going to start out great, but eventually it will be great once we've done all the work that we need to do.
Yeah, thank you. And I also need to point out that these films are well balanced, also in terms of action and in terms of story. And there's a great deal of humor, also, especially the airport scene when Simon Pegg says, "Well, I didn't mean to bother you. Well, it's it's a nuclear bomb. What you have
Yes.
to tell me? Well,
Yes. Yeah, 20 seconds. It's like,
yeah.
how much time have we got? 20 seconds? Yeah. I also love the bit where Luther says no one is safe from Phineas Freak. And Luther just has a little twinkle in his eye. And I love the fact that we're bringing back his identities because he was the Net Ranger and Phineas Freak in the first movie. He was a hacker. He was like a world-class hacker. And so to bring back those little nicknames for him, I think was very satisfying. Doesn't matter for people who've never seen the movies before, but if you are a fan of the first mission and the other missions, there's quite a lot of other things in there which will make you smile. And
Yes.
having Kittredge back, for example, is great. Is just such fun. Yeah, we work on the humor. I remember the seeing Ethan Hunt get in the Fiat and seeing him like not sure how to start it, and having Grace sat next to him kind of going, okay, it's fine, don't worry. And he crashes the car, and then he's like, oh, I'm so, oh, it's the way they set them up sometimes. And she's like, it's fine. And it's interesting, James Bond would never do that. Even Roger Moore would never go that far, I don't think. But because we're Mission and because we have that tone, we can lean into that sometimes in the way that other movies can't, and also you don't need a lot of humor in these movies. If you can have 5 or 6 decent laughs through the movie, that's all you need to break the tension at the right point. There's another one which was discovered on the set where Ethan and Grace are hanging in the vertical piano car, and the grand piano's above them in the bar car. And he says, do you trust me? And she shakes her head because she's in shock. It's very funny. The audience love it. And it was something that Haley discovered on the day when we were filming. It was never scripted like that. But it was very human and breaks the suspense, the tension just perfectly at that point. So you can start ratcheting up again afterwards to Ethan shouting at her to jump across because the piano is about to give way and crush her. Yeah, that was great fun. And we're very aware of the power of comedy in these films. But we don't chase after it. It has to come out of natural behavior, really. It can't be a gag. Like there's a couple of gags, like when Benji says, or as we call it, Tuesday or whatever he says in the airport, when he's talking about that they're going rogue and, this is an unsanctioned mission that's gone rogue before it's even started, or as we call it, or Monday, I think he says. But so that's a gag that we're chasing after. But when you meet, for people who've never seen Mission before, they need to know that Benji is the funny guy. And so we start on a gag so that you laugh and you go, okay, he's the funny guy. And there was a version of the film where we cut that out and just started with Ethan going, we need to get the key, we need to do this. And we'd lost the introduction to Benji and Luther. So we ended up quite late putting back the beginning of the scene so that they were properly introduced as characters. But we were trying so many ways to get the running time down that we were pretty ruthless at times. And then when you go too far, you put stuff back,
Yeah. And I also love the whole build up to the motorcycle stunt and the whole interaction between Benji and Ethan. And Benji is cruising around in his car, and he's acting like, well, it's a perfectly normal thing to do for Tom Cruise to jump off the cliff with the motorcycle.
I know. He's like, but he said that, I remember in Rogue Nation when he's like, so I had to hold my breath for 3 minutes, and Benji's like, you can do that. And it's the same kind of deal. And I love the bit where he goes, I'm under a lot of pressure right now. And then you cut to Ethan on the top of the mountain, and he's got to figure out how to jump off and get on the train. It's so funny. But I have to say, Simon Pegg is so brilliant at understanding the tone of the genre and understanding just how much to give us in terms of exasperated Benji. Not angry Benji, that's no fun, but exasperated Benji is fun to watch. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it is great fun, and we really work hard at those moments to make sure they work perfectly, or as good as we can make them work.
Yeah, and there was a similar scene in the Fallout with Benji when he says, oh, the screen was upside down. And then Tom Cruise is about to jump out of the window, and Benji says, what are you doing? What's going on? Benji, I'm about to jump out of the window. So give me some time. Yeah. I
He says,
would,
"Oh, sorry, I had it in 2D or something, so he
yes.
can't see the height." Yeah, that's so funny. And again, Simon Pegg is perfect in those moments. He's so good. And then you cut to get to Luther in the front of the van, like shaking his head, like, "Oh, Benji, basic mistake, buddy." And you've got Ilsa sat there, like looking at him, going, "What are you doing?" I loved all that stuff. It's so it's right in the middle of this big intense chase, and it's so much fun. I love it. It's really cool.
It's so appropriate for the scene and the
Yeah.
storytelling process.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of credit. I mean, McHugh and Tom, they understand the tone of these movies and they know how to get the humor just right. And we do try stuff that doesn't work. Believe me, like not everything works, and we cut it out so that you just are never aware that it doesn't work. But when we have something that really lands, like the running gag of Briggs trying to lift people's faces off, like he does in the airport, and then he does it to Kittredge at the end because he's desperate to get Ethan and he doesn't trust anybody. That's just great fun for fans of the series, but also people who are virgin viewers. There's just running gag there to keep alive. It's great fun.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, I also tend to believe that you don't have to have watched all the previous movies, but it certainly helps because you have grown fond of the characters. Ving Rhames is an intrinsic part of the series. And characters like Rebecca Ferguson, she joined later. Simon Pegg, he joined later. But still, you get. Well, I grew up basically with Mission Impossible. I was 11.
Yeah.
I was 11 years old when I saw the first mission. So
Right.
it's just great fun. Yeah, I love it.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm so pleased. I'm thrilled that you were a happy moviegoer when you saw it. That's very
Yes.
important to
Well,
us.
I love movies. It's such a big part of my life, and
Yes,
I'm really a big movie buff. I love it with all my heart. So it's really important to me. It's like I'm really passionate about it.
fantastic. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, me too.
Right. And Eddie, is there anything else you would like to add about this mission or about Tom Cruise, Chris McQuarrie, about anything else, in your line of work?
Yeah, I'm very very happy, and I feel fortunate to have aligned myself or met Chris McQuarrie when he was doing Rogue Nation in 2014, and he's become a great friend. Tom Cruise has become a friend and somebody that I admire greatly, and it's my pleasure to collaborate with them and work hard on these movies with them and bring them to audiences. The next one, part 2, is going to be another step up in terms of stakes and action and intense emotion. Genuinely, you're going to see the most extraordinary action set pieces in that film. And you may come out of Dead Reckoning Part 1 thinking, how are they going to top this? But we have, I promise you, and it'll be worth the wait. And I'm very excited for you to experience Part 2 and feel the continuation of the story and feel a lot of payoffs to stuff that we've set up in Part 1. Because ideally, you would watch Part 1 and Part 2. You might do a matinee and an evening. You could do a double bill in one day. A bit like it was when, we all watched Lord of the Rings, or Harry Potter the Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2. Ideally, you don't want to leave a year between. You want to kind of watch them quicker than that. But it's going to be it's extraordinary what they've done and where they've gone in the world to film it. It's just epic in scale, completely epic, and all real, all practical, astonishing. That there's a scene at the end of the movie which has more stunts almost than the rest of this whole series put together. I'm not exaggerating. Tom Cruise was risking his life every day for nearly 4 months filming every day. There's more aerial photography. Well, it's about the same amount of aerial photography as we did for the whole of Top Gun Maverick, but it's just for one sequence. That's all I'll say. It's really something. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into it,
Wow.
with the team.
Wow. I'm looking forward to Dead Reckoning Part 2, that's for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Great. And thank you, Eddie, for taking so much time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that. We've spoken for 70 minutes to be exact.
And say hi to all your friends and hello to everyone in Germany. That's where you live, right? You're in Germany.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So all your German fans and all the fans out there who are listening to this show, thank you so much for listening.
Great. And I'm looking forward to chatting again down the road.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.